Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good tomorrow, wherever you are in the world. I'm Fred Plotkin. This is Fred Plotkin on Fridays on idagio.com. As is typical for us, we join up in different places with different people. I'm in New York, as always. Uh, my wonderful engineer, Eric, who has now done 20 episodes with me, is in Berlin. And my guest today, Ettore Volontieri, an old and dear friend of mine, who is one of these important people in the music business that most people don't know, except for those of us in the music business. Are you in Zurich?
No, actually, I'm in Lausanne,
Lausanne in
in
Switzerland. Okay.
Switzerland, but
Yeah,
in Lausanne. Yeah,
in Switzerland.
I
Okay.
circulate.
You do circulate. That's part of your job. Now, I'm going to describe Ettore briefly, and then we'll learn more about him. You are Italian, obviously.
Yes.
You have worked in the classical music and opera field for quite a few years, starting very, very young. Even though you still look young, you're
Thank
not
you.
in your first blush of youth. You're a
Mhm.
father of four children, and you have done something that the best managers of musicians do, and that's one of your careers as a manager of musicians. You have been an architect of careers. And by that, I mean that many managers I know in music, in writing for agents who represent that, or movie stars or actors, whatever, frankly, are there for the money and look at each person they represent not so much as a human being, but as a potential to make money. Whereas the best managers, and I count you among them, are someone who recognize the rare worth of the artists that you work with, but are not their slave either. I've seen a few managers who are more like assistants who get the dry cleaning and so forth. But the best managers and the best, luckiest artists are those who have someone like you who knows the music intimately, who has a passion for the music, who can recognize greatness, who can say sometimes delicately, no, I don't think that's a good piece for you. But then the artist may come back and say, but I want to do it anyway. Um, I can think of a manager I know here in New York who had a stable of very important musicians. And if he felt that one musician was really good for a particular opera role or symphonic work, he wouldn't let his other artists do it because he wanted the musician that he thought should do it to do it, even if she didn't want to. And that's problematic because you're suppressing the creativity, not you. One is suppressing the creativity of artists. So Ettore Volontieri, among his many accomplishments, is someone who has mastered the delicate art of encouraging, supporting, and guiding artists, but not dominating them, but also not being dominated by them. Do you think that's a fair description of who you are and what you do?
Well, Fred, thank you so much. This is an amazing description. I would keep the recording for the future, for future records. Really good one. Well, I think you expressed perfectly what for me is the has been the ideal in my profession. Now, technically, I'm in the profession for 30 years now, even 30, soon 31 year, because I started in October 1989. But in fact, I can say I'm in music for longer time. I've been studying singing in my youth when I was 18. Then during the university time, I've been working as an extra at Teatro La Scala because I had this really great passion for the stage. And then I work as a assistant stage director. So I was first time with my family at La Scala when I was maybe 5 or 6. And I cannot remember really a moment of my life without attending concerts or operas. So
So you grew up in Milan.
yes, I was born in Milan and I grew up in Milan. And my family, my father, if I may say a little anecdote, which is very funny, my father was living in a village outside Milan, but his uncle was a shoemaker, and he had I don't know how, but he had a contract to make shoes for the usher of La Scala, Le Maschere della Scala.
Mhm.
So my father, at the age of 13, took the boxes with the shoes and went to La Scala to deliver the shoes to the ushers. And so the ushers were only offering him to sit and to listen. And my father keeps saying that his first experience when he was 13 was to attend in 1943 a very famous production of Il Trovatore with Lauri Volpi. And so after this, he got so in love with opera. And when in like a few years later, when he was able to buy a subscription in La Scala, he started, I think it was already 1960 or so. And then since then, he's still subscribing at La Scala. So my family has a very close association with this theater. And so did I at the beginning of my life.
So, as you know, Milan is the principal city of Lombardy in northern Italy. And I've spent a great deal of my life in Italy, but particularly in Liguria, Emilia-Romagna, and Lombardy, and worked at La Scala when I was a very young man. I think we overlap, but we're going to figure that out later. Um, and I went to the University of Pavia, which is south of Milan.
Mhm.
And what town was your family from where the shoemakers were? Was it Vigevano or
No, it's called
Varese?
Magenta. Magenta.
Magenta, as in Corso Magenta.
Yeah, Magenta is a relatively is not a very small is a relatively small city, let's say, about 20,000 inhabitants. And my family, the family of my father, was originally from there. So my father was traveling to Milan, but then when he met my mother, then they established in Milan, and I was born in Milan in 1964. So
Is your
I'm not
mother
a young boy
Milanese?
anymore. Sorry.
Is your mother Milanese?
My mother is also Milanese. Yeah, yeah. My
Okay.
mother and father both, let's say, almost Milanese.
Um, what people don't know if they're not from Lombardy, and especially Milan, is that La Scala, and not only, I would say Vienna is like this, New York was like this, Paris was like this, has a community that surrounds its opera house that supplies all kinds of services. So that there are tailors and shoemakers, wig designers, people who do makeup, people who cook. I I get my hair cut, and I haven't been there for a while. It's all pulled back at a barber in Milan that serves as the barber. Puccini went to that barber shop. I took Thomas Hampson to that barber shop, and it's very close to where La Scala is. It's on the street where Manzoni lived, and these people, Daniel Barenboim goes for his shave and haircut there, and many people from La Scala do the stagehands. And this sense of community that that theater creates is something that the public doesn't necessarily see. So I'll give you an example. In 2016, I was supposed to appear at the Opera Ball in Vienna, and I needed a proper Viennese outfit that was to be fitted for me and designed in Vienna. And they wrote to me and they said, send me your measurements. I was much heavier then than I am now, so I don't post that picture anymore. But send the measurements. And I couldn't find anyone in New York, even at the Metropolitan Opera, who could do the measurements in metric form. And I knew that I had to send it metric. And I was supposed to be working at La Scala sort of late in 2015. And I went to the costume shop there, and they sent me to a specific tailor who perfectly did the measurements perfectly. His name is Jacopo, and sent them to Vienna so that when I got to Vienna in January of 2016, my clothing was all ready. It was
It
all
was perfectly
perfectly
done.
done. And the tailor in Vienna said, these are the most perfect measurements I've ever seen in terms of detail and understanding of the body. And I mention this because a great part of what Italy is, what Milan is in particular, being a famous fashion center, is this sense of beauty, style, let's call it a desire for perfection, if not achieving perfection, that makes the Milanese rather demanding in a good way, but also in a difficult way in terms of knowing what quality should be and all these little details. So that
Absolutely.
you mentioned the usher's outfit, the maschere. Anyone who's been to La Scala knows that the ushers are the most beautifully dressed ushers in the world
And
with
absolutely
designer
unique.
clothing.
They have this unique uniform, huh?
It is.
With
I
the
mean,
medaglione.
I actually, many, many years ago, designed the uniform for the ushers of the Metropolitan Opera, and it's fine and it has capes and the good tailoring, but nothing like what one sees at La Scala. And so growing up, Ettore, in that world and seeing all of this beauty, and I won't call it grandeur, but I'll call it excellence. How did that inform your worldview about the music business, about what you wanted to do in it?
Well, I mean, it has been, I would say, a process. Huh? I would call it a real Bildungsroman. Huh? One
A
would
novel,
say
a novel.
a novel, a roman de
Yeah,
formation,
yeah.
en français, in French. I remember that again, my father, who was full of how to say surprises, he was working in an insurance company, and if he end up insuring people at La Scala, and he particularly started insuring people in the backstage, starting with the head of the phonics, the head of the technicians. So it happened that when I was 13, again more or less the age of my father first time, he took me backstage during the performance, and this was the, how to say, the really coup de foudre
So I'm
of
just going
my.
to interrupt. That was 1977, yes?
That was a trovatore conducted by, I think, by Zubin Mehta, and I remember very well that the tenor was Ermanno Mauro.
Yes.
And the funny thing is that I find myself in the backstage suddenly at the beginning of the opera. My father takes me in the backstage. I go there, and of course, there are many people running around in costumes, and music is coming. And then suddenly I find myself standing behind a harp, and I don't understand why. And then I see that somebody comes, a lady comes, and start playing the harp. And then a monumental man comes and starts singing Deserto sulla terra. And then I was shocked by this huge voice, because Hermano Mauro had a really great
Had a
voice, not the
huge
most
voice.
beautiful one, but huge. And I have to say that at this moment, I got in love with the singing voice. I understood what the fascination, I don't know why, but singing voice has always, from this moment on, played an incredible fascination in my life.
The reason I asked you about the year is that that basically is the same year that I went to work at La Scala, very late in 1977 through 1979. And so I was in 77, I was 21 and you were 13. So I may have seen you backstage. I was very young and new, and all of this was
I
a
was, of course,
remarkable world
I
for me.
was hiding myself because I was not supposed to be there. And at one point, I remember the man who was the head of the palcoscenico, Maestro Camerini, at some point,
Palcoscenico meaning stage.
yeah, the
Yeah.
stage, and then in later year, I got friend with him, and we were laughing about this small anecdote. And I remember once said, "Who is this young guy?" because I was not supposed to be there. But I have to say, this was a way to gain somebody to the music life forever.
But when you started singing, where and in what context did you start to sing?
Well, of course, being in contact with singers, sometimes very closely, because then my father used to take me over and over, and I was asking him, "Please, can you take me back?" And the reason why uh, I ask you so insistently about Capuccilli is because the second real fulguration of my life was in '78. I was a bit older already and more experienced on what I was hearing. And then I was attending the performance of La Forza del Destino, very famous production with a stellar cast, including Caballé, Giauro, Carreras, Capuccilli, amazing cast. And I happened to be on in backstage when Capuccilli was singing his aria, and again the feeling uh, of the physical body of the voice, especially with this kind of voices, was so strong that I started willing to produce myself something similar. And the first experience I can remember was uh, during summer. I was in Spain with my family, and I find myself suddenly into a cave, and I started singing in this cave, and my voice, because it was a cave, very resonant, had a kind of body.
Yeah.
And I remember I was singing because it was the time of Simone Bocanegra. Also, I mean, this was a glorious time for La Scala with Don Carlo, Simone Bocanegra, Forza del Destino. I mean, great productions and amazing singing, which probably made the recent history of La Scala so great. And I was singing the Serenata di Gabriele Adorno,
From Simone
from
Bocanegra.
Simone Bocanegra in this cave. And this is the first perception I have of my voice. Then my father, with all his activities, was also ensuring a man who was related with the teacher, my singing teacher. And I started taking singing lesson when I was 18, I think. I just turned 18, and my voice was already consolidated. And so he said, "Okay, we can start." And he was a baritone. A baritone. Or his origin was from Ankara. His name, Italian name, because then he took an Italian name, was Orazio Gualtieri, who had a nice career, very provincial career, but once he sang in La Scala, Scarpia, because he was replacing something last minute. And so in his room where he was teaching, I had a poster of him singing Scarpia and was so proud of it. But so this man somehow formed my voice at the beginning, and he told me, "You are definitely a baritone, you have to sing baritone." And he started forming me this voice, and I had a great time. I mean, of course, I was like a kind of alien in my environment at school. I remember I was talking about opera with my friends, and they said, "What is opera? Why you are talking to us about this?" So I was a bit of an alien, but I was happy. I was happy. Opera made me very happy in my childhood.
I want to point out to listeners that each week I ask my guests to provide some musical selections that you can find on Adagio. And one of them was Verdi as sung by Piero Capuccilli, the great baritone. And given the way the music business works, in some parts of the world, you are allowed to listen to the selection of La Forza del Destino. In my country, for now, you can't. Um, you can also listen apparently everywhere to Simone Bocanegra, which was done more or less at the same time at La Scala with Piero Capuccilli in both operas, and that's why we picked that. And also further because the first opera production I worked on at La Scala, and I understood that it was something very rare, was this famous Simone Bocanegra. I was the assistant to the stage director, producer Giorgio Strehler, and we had Morella Freni and Piero Capuccilli and Jose Carreras and Nicolai Chiaura, Claudio Abbado conducting. And I was the assistant, and my job, it was a revival, it was not a new production, was to help put this back on the stage. And these artists we had a different tenor than Carreras originally, but these artists were all familiar with this beautiful production. And the main thing among many that I learned two things. One was Mirella Freni took me aside on the first day, this famous star, and she said in Italian, Federico, as she called me, I want to teach you a word in Italian. The Italian word is collega. That means colleague. You are my colleague. I am your colleague. And I am only as good as you are. And she formulated it that way. And what I came to understand was she obviously was a big star and I was a little assistant, but she didn't think that. She thought that if I did my best work, it makes her work better. So that she was willing to go through rehearsals with me of things that she knew perfectly so that I would learn and would be impadronito, as the Italians say, a master of the material. So that we had to do this particular staging of Come in quest'ora bruna, the first aria that she sings. In this production, she sang from very, very far away and then entered the stage. And Maestro Botto in the pit would play it in such a way that there was a slight time lag of a fraction of a second, so that Freni's sound would arrive with the orchestra at the right moment. And the closer that we got, I walked with her initially so that I could hear. Maestro Botto changed the way he conducted the orchestra so the sound was always unified. It's these little details that most audience members would never recognize that were essential. And from that point forward, every person that I work with in opera and music, and now I'm older and a little more accomplished, is my colleague. And I'm their colleague. And that's how we work. And this notion that musicians and opera people are difficult, a few of them are, but so are politicians and executives and doctors and
Well,
lawyers and
they
every
are
other
people.
profession.
They are people carrying great responsibilities also. So
Of course.
that's why you need just to help them to give the best they can.
Yeah. And that's part of what you do so excellently. And I've seen many people who do your job, so I know the difference. So that was the first point. The second point was that I think that at that time, people at La Scala did not recognize that it was a golden age. And many critics, including for Corriere della Sera, and many members of the audience who were older would say, well, Freni, Capuccilli, Domingo, Pavarotti, Carreras, you name all the others, Caballé, they're okay, but it's not Maria Callas, it's not Renata Tebaldi.
It's not Bergonzi, it's not Di Stefano, it's not Del Monaco,
it's
not
not
Corelli, of
They
course.
kept complaining that it was not that. And yes,
Wow.
that was a wonderful age too. And Visconti made beautiful productions, but Streller made beautiful productions that were modern and theatrically.
I believe that this time you are mentioning was a very special and accomplished time at La Scala because of the complex. So staging, we had so many beautiful staging. I also will recall the often presence of Jean-Pierre Ponel,
Yes.
amazing stage director. Zeffirelli in his very good time, in his prime time. Other very, very important stage director working really together.
Luca
With,
Ronconi, Pizzi.
Ronconi, Pizzi.
Yeah.
I mean, but to back up what you are saying about the audience of La Scala is there is this memorable premiere of Otello conducted by Kleiber when the audience from the Loggione is shouting on the poor Kleiber before the beginning of the second act, criticizing his conducting and saying that the orchestra is playing like a banda. I mean, shocking, no? I mean, I would say shocking, but anyhow.
Well, also, I remember
I'm
that
happy
Montserrat
that I
Caballé,
went through this.
I don't know if you heard Montserrat Caballé in that period singing Lucrezia Borgia. And Maria Callas had sung it magnificently at La Scala, and she said famously, "Dopo di me nessuno," after me there will be no one. And the moment Caballé began to sing, the audience started booing. And similarly, when Renee Fleming came to La Scala in 1998 for Lucrezia Borgia, I was there. The few notes that she was able to sing, they started booing because they felt that Callas had owned that role.
Yeah,
And so
that was unfortunately.
it leads me to ask a question. I know certain opera singers of today, some of our finest, who won't sing at La Scala and won't sing at certain theaters because they're not afraid of the audience, but they don't want to have to deal with that. So they take their talents elsewhere, and their talents are very much in demand. Do you think that La Scala's audience in some way has suppressed the arrival of certain great performers at La Scala?
Well, it was the case. I think this kind of audience, in the good and in a bad sense, is gone. Is gone, especially in the more recent year. La Scala became, for many reasons, international audience theater. So many tourists goes to La Scala. So it's not the same audience of the abbonati subscribers who basically, at the time I was young, I remember were somehow in a way owning La Scala. This was also not a good thing, generally speaking. But of course, it created a kind of family environment, a kind of, I would say, very familiar environment for everybody, which was at least for me, was a very pleasant feeling.
I don't know if audience members know the term the claque.
The clock.
CLAQUE.
I remember the clock. I remember the
Describe
head at my time when I was then starting to go a bit more, to be a bit more familiar with the backstage. I remember the head of the clock was a very
What
elegantly
is the
dressed
claque?
man.
Describe what the claque is.
The clock is a group of people who are sitting, or better say, standing in the loggione, in the gallery, in the last gallery, and they lounge, and they sustain the applause, and they have a way of clapping very loud and very solid and professional clapping, I would say. So these people were creating, of course, the big success, or could creating the failure of an opera. And of course, it was a delicate, one could say today that it was a scandal, how you can leave the clock managing this. But at the time was made by, I made personally many people from the clock, and they were passionate lovers of music. And I didn't remember really kind of aggressive way of asking for some money to the singers. I remember the head of the clock, very elegantly dressed, going backstage at the end of the performance, and the singers giving them some money, but in a way like giving them a bit of support, in a very genuine.
Well, let me explain. You're a gentleman. What happened in the claque, because I was there a few years before you as attending, not yet performing or working, is that the claque would go to certain singers and say to them, if you pay me, I will, if you're singing Aida, I will applaud for you and I will boo the Amneris. So that
this is what I would call the degeneration of the clock.
And
in its
that
most genuine,
amount.
that's happening. Unfortunately, happened many times. But in the genuine and positive sense, the clock was made by people with very little income. I remember famous one. His name was Natale, and he was literally going to La Scala every evening.
Yeah,
I mean, I tell you, every evening, and it's a commitment. And he was going there even when La Scala was half empty, because the production was not so interesting, and there were no stars singing. And he was then there applauding and encouraging the audience to applaud, and creating the atmosphere also of people who knows when to applaud and when not. Because this is something also which is important. You have to know when to applaud, when is the right moment, and you do not disturb the continuation, the flow of the music. I mean, again, I have to say I'm glad I was able to leave this time and to see the different aspects of this, which were definitely not only negative.
You and I have a friend in common, a singer who is younger than we are by you are. I'm older than you are. By a few years. And when she made her La Scala debut, she didn't know what the clack was. And someone from the clack came to her and asked her for money. And she thought that he was a beggar. And she said, "Well, why do you need the money?" And he said, "This way I will applaud for you when you make your debut, and I'll make sure that you get a positive applause." And our friend said, "Non ne ho bisogno. I don't need that." Because to her, it was offensive that someone would be paid to applaud to make her look good. And she said, in effect, if I'm not good, I'm not good. But if I'm good, I'm good. And she left it up to that. And she was one of the last singers to even say that to the clack, and after which they really stopped asking for money. But we had something similar in New York. It was not quite so formal, but many of the Italian artists who would come to New York would develop in the Italian American community here a kind of clack. But the difference was that here they would often have dinner with these people. They would
Yeah,
cook.
you have the
Caruso
groupies,
would
you have
cook for these people.
the
Yeah,
groupies, people who
yeah.
are attending every performance of certain singers or conductor. I remember when I was working for a very famous Russian conductor, and there was a lady who was literally outside the theater, outside the stage door, waiting for him. I mean, everywhere in New York, in London, in Milan, and I was so touched because those people there. She was not a rich lady,
No.
contrary, and but she was so committed. I mean, those people. I don't know if you have still this kind of people. I mean,
There are some, and most of them are very nice and caring, and we love that they exist. A few of them, very few of them, are a little crazy. And sometimes the
they are.
artists have to keep their distance or receive help. When I worked at the Met, there was a particular very famous singer who had someone who was obsessed with her and
There's
had
become a stalking action, which is
it was almost stalking.
a bit
And
different.
we
Yeah.
had to make sure that that person was not anywhere near our singer so that the singer could be relaxed and do her work. And uh, the outgrowth of that was that I became a very good friend of that singer because I walked her home after every performance and then I'd make dinner and we became very good friends. But it began because she was afraid of this person who kept sending her flowers and notes and making demands of her time, and that's can be a little scary.
Yeah.
So
It can become. I mean, of course, that's black side,
yeah.
dark side of
Well,
the
you
phenomenon.
mentioned Russian conductor, and so I want to turn toward Russia. But the first thing I want to mention as a transition is you are the only artist manager I know, and maybe there are others, who
Well, I'm sure.
only has conductors. Most managers I know have conductors and singers and instrumentalists and maybe stage directors and a speaker sometimes, but you only have conductors. Why is that?
Well, in fact, this was the result of a process in a way that when I started in a more somehow confused way, representing singers, soloists, conductors, organizing orchestra touring. And then, I mean, I would make the story short because it's a very articulate story, and I will not go into details. But the most important thing is that I like to create a strategy, to create a, a way through. And unfortunately, with singers, with very few exceptions, they they need to be day by day feed by securities. And I mean, the voice is unfortunately the most unsecure thing, because today you have it and tomorrow you're not sure to have it anymore. So it's of course something which sorry, the phone is ringing, but this phone I couldn't stop. I'm saying that the way you create the career, a long-term career with a conductor, is impossible to achieve with a singer. And so the typical thing was that I was starting careers with people, and then those people were jumping to bigger agencies. They were accepting the offers from a bigger agency than my agency. So I realized that it was frustrating. I mean, I have to mention, I will not mention names, but I really had very few, but very significant, important singers starting their career with me in my office and then leaving. And I'm not, of course, unhappy with them. I understand is the logic of the mentality of a singer, except few cases. But then I realized that with conductors I could act a different way. I could realize my dream of thinking, what about the next 5-10 years? And of course, I was very fortunate, I have to say, because I mean, one name I have to do, Gianandrea Noseda, is, of course, for me, more than an artist, is like a brother. We are exactly the same age, and we built up our professional lives together. I mean, he was the first artist I signed when I became an independent agent, and he was just beginning his career after winning 2 international competitions. So Gianandrea and I, when I mention Gianandrea, I cannot avoid to mention Lucia, because Gianandrea and Lucia are really
His wife. Yep.
Yeah, his wife. They are really a unity, a very rare case of strong, incredible unity.
And I should just add, they're both very close friends of mine as well.
Yes,
I met you through them.
So I was fortunate to build all up with them this path, this very long. We work now together since 1995, so 26 years now. So, and this I have learned a lot from this experience. A lot. I also made my mistakes. That's clear. But I was again fortunate enough to have a man understanding the good faith of my mistakes, and also who understand that in the long term, to have somebody you can trust 100% is the most important value in life. Especially when you become somebody important, you need to trust people around you, not only financially. I mean, there are cases, very famous cases in the history of classical music, of people who have been badly betrayed by managers financially, from the financial point of view, but also to trust people when important steps on the career are concerned. So you need people you absolutely know they will never say something if not because they want your success.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how I consolidate this idea of working only with conductor, of starting conductor from the beginning. So I had then a second fortunate case with Daniele Rustioni, who is another young and very talented, who is now achieving already at the age of 37 very important steps in his career, and so on. I mean,
And I should mention that one of the selections of music you provided was Hermanovic Ferrari's Violin Concerto, played by Rustioni and his wife, Francesca Dego, who is a violinist.
Yeah, exactly. And the reason why I selected this, I would say it's a multiple reason, because first of all, one of my goal in the profession is also to achieve some of my dreams through artists. One of my dream, I mean, I'm graduated at university as a musicologist, and I always liked the Italian repertoire of the first half of the 20th century, a symphonic repertoire which has been, of course, neglected because of the political general situation. I mean, these composers, starting from Casella, Volferrari,
Casella, yeah.
Malipiero, Ghedini, all this group of composers, they were flourishing during the time of Mussolini, and at the end of the fascism, those people were somehow banned from the programs, and I think unjustly so.
Was
Sorry,
Zandonai one of those as well?
no, Zandonai is earlier. I
Earlier,
mean,
and
Zandonai.
Mascagni, though, Mascagni lived longer.
Mascagni lived longer, but one has to say Cavalleria Rusticana was premiered in 1996, in 1896.
Yeah.
So I mean, Mussolini was far to come,
Yeah.
and Mascagni after Cavalleria Rusticana was already so famous.
But talking he was about also people, a rather open fascist. Unfortunately.
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
That's we get into a very delicate case. Yeah. I mean, we could mention people like Beniamino Gigli or even more Aureliano Pertile,
yeah.
Who were, or even the tenor which I mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, Lauri Volpi, who left Italy after the fall of the fascism and went to Spain. I mean, I don't want to enter into political discussions. What for me was important is that the composers which were really flourishing in the period of Mussolini and the fascism were good composers. And the fact that, unfortunately, they were living at the time finally was for them more of a damage than of an advantage. That's what I want to say. And especially people like Volferrari and Casella. Let's just one word more about Volferrari. I was thinking of a concerto to put together Daniele and Francesca, and they wanted to record something together, and they wanted to have something significant. So they asked me my opinion, and for some reasons, it was in the period I was reading about Volferrari, and I discovered the beautiful history of the violin concerto. His violin concerto was composed in 1944, a very dark year for the Europe in general. It was very dark in general because even Germany, who was earlier, of course, the winning nation, in 1944 had already had bombing, was already in a very difficult situation. So people were living difficult life, and Volferrari was between. He was born in Italy, but from a father from Munich. So he was living in Munich, and of course, it didn't have nothing to do with politics. He just wanted to compose music. It was kind of Mozart of his time. Politics was just not important for him. And this violin concerto is like a man who is not closing the door. He do not want to listen to anything outside and put his own carillon. You know, when you put the carillon and you listen to a very nice, tender, beautiful melody, and you hope through this melody to forget what is outside. This concerto for me is a kind of message of this this specific. And the story which is also behind is interesting because Volferrari was in love with a violinist, a very young and beautiful Argentinian violinist, Guila Gustavo. And of course, she was so young that she didn't care about this old man. But you feel that through the music, he's also expressing a kind of love letter, especially in the second movement of the violin concerto. And I think Daniele and Francesca, they did an extremely sensitive and wonderful work with this recording.
I listened to it yesterday. It's really very beautiful. It was a discovery for me. And listeners, I point this out as an example of what I mean of how a manager can be an architect of careers, but also introduce his or her musicians to music that they may not know. And it requires a degree of culture in the manager that, I can say this, I often do not see. And and because some managers contact me and they will say, I have an artist and this is what she's working on and this is what she's good at. What would you recommend she sing or play? And I will sometimes do that. And inevitably the manager will say it was his idea. But that that's part of the business. I do this because I would like to see an artist play something meaningful. You and I know that our friend John Andrea, there was a particular work that he was not, I won't say ignorant of, he didn't care about. It was the composer he didn't care about, and an opera that he didn't think to do. And I sort of leaned on him about it. And then
Absolutely.
he went and studied it, and he had a great success with it. And I'm happy for it. It's not my doing, but I'm happy that I knew him enough to think that this would be a happy work for him. And it was. And there's another work I gave him to look at a number of years ago. He doesn't seem to be taking to that one yet, but we'll see.
Sometimes you need time. Huh?
I know. Um, but I just think, knowing him as a friend, as a person, I think that he would identify in many ways with that work, and beyond the music, but some of the subject matter. So we'll see. Um, this leads me to a different and bigger topic. That you said that you were working with a Russian conductor. You, from almost the beginnings of your career, have been very involved in the Russian music scene and Russian music and Russian repertory. And I'll just say ahead of time one thing. My family background is Russian and Ukrainian, and one family, part of it was from St. Petersburg and others from further south. And we all have a great passion for everything Italian. And I would bet that if my DNA were studied, that I have Italian DNA, because so many Italians went to St. Petersburg to help build the city.
Absolutely true. To
And
design the city in some case.
yeah, Plotkin means carpenter. And usually the people who took Russian names had the name of the profession. And my family was full of carpenters until my father, who was a musician. But before that, they all worked in wood. So it's certainly possible. Um, and there is this very strong feeling. I once interviewed Marcello Mastroianni, and he told me of his very deep passion for Russian culture. And he said to me, you think Italians are emotional, you should see the Russians. The Italians are cold compared to the Russians. And I won't make a generalization, but yes, Russian language and Russian speech and the endearments of the Russian language and the passion of everything they do, and the, whatever we say about politics, the courage and the patience of the Russian people is rather remarkable. And did you early on have a strong feeling for Russia, or was it purely that you loved the music?
Well, in fact, I got to know Russia through the business because my first boss, who was a kind of controversial impresario, in 1990 sent me the first time to Russia. He was one of the impresarios of Slava Rostropovich. So this, of course, gave me the chance to be close with Rostropovich for 2.5 years, and I really enjoyed his presence, and I had a lot of great memories because people like Slava, they were really monumental human being in a good and the bad sense, and not only in the good sense, but the personality was just monumental. And so in January now 90, I went for the first time to Russia, and I didn't talk a word of Russian, but I had an interpreter. And so I started with my English, and she was translating one phrase in English, one phrase in Russia, and so forth. And then one of the characteristic of this impresario was to work a lot with Russians. So we represented another Russian conductor who didn't speak a single word of English. So one time I remember very well, it's a memorable episode for my life. Once I had to discuss with him the program of a concert he had to conduct in Genova. And so I take the phone and I start talking to him, and I realize that he doesn't speak a word of anything else than Russian. And then suddenly I start using something which I remember from the conversation, from the translation of my interpreter. And little by little, I was able to put together a kind of conversation, and we agreed on the program. So this was for me a very nice first step. And then another funny, very funny thing, which happened encouraging and helping me with Russian. At the time, I was working in an office in Monte Carlo with this impresario. And this man was, in a way, he had his own visions. And at some point, he wanted to create a production. He wanted to create a production from scratch, so inviting stage director, composer, Sofia Gubaidulina, stage director, set designer, costume designer, everybody. And he decided for a set designer who was, I think he's still alive, he's in his late 80s, Temuraz Murvanidze, a Georgian guy who could speak two languages, Georgian and Russian. And for 6 months, this man was in my office creating design. And at some point, we had to start talking. And then he was so smart, was a very smart guy. And he said, I will teach you Russian. And he did. He did, with the fantasy, with the gestures, with designs, sketching. When I didn't understand what is this, and he was sketching this. It was an amazing experience. So as a result, after 6, 7 months, I was able to have a conversation in Russian, and then on and on. And was for me a way to become closer not only to music but to culture, because the Russians, they like to speak, they like to have conversations after concert until late night, drinking and speaking. This was, of course, their way to overcome the dramas they were living in their personal life. So drinking and talking to each other was a kind of solidarity, human solidarity, which helped them to survive in the most difficult time. So even in the later time, when I started going to Russia in the early 90s, this was still very, very present. This feeling, this way of dealing people to each other. And because I was able to speak Russian, I got included in their conversation. Even if, of course, at the beginning I could understand 20%, then 25, then 30, little by little becoming part of. And I remember nights listening to conversations. Very fascinating, very fascinating.
I think they're great audiences too. When I've attended performances, I've only been to Moscow once in 1979, but I've been to St. Petersburg very, very often for work. And the audiences in St. Petersburg are passionate, intelligent, love their
Very
music,
cultivated,
love
very
their
extremely
artists.
cultivated.
Yeah, it's rather remarkable. I know a few cities where the level of proficiency of the audiences is high. Vienna can be that way, Milan can be that way, segments of New York and London, and Barcelona has a very, very good audience in terms of knowledge. And parts of Germany, Berlin, but Berlin is distinct because of the three opera houses and the history of being divided. But if you go, say, to Scandinavia, and I adore Scandinavia, I go there as much as I can, but the relationship is different. They have a quiet pride in their singers. You go to Sweden, which produces all of these wonderful singers, and the Swedes don't want to be better than one another, and they don't want to see themselves as excelling. Whereas if a great Italian singer excels, he or she excels, and that's okay. And an American were the same. But in Sweden, you can be Birgit Nilsson or Nina Stemma or any one of these great
Jussi
singers.
Björling,
You see
Gustav
Björling,
Winberg.
yeah, and
They
Peter
had many.
Mattei now, and
Peter
all of
Mattei.
them. I mean, Sweden is remarkable for the number of great singers it's given us, and yet they're rather modest about it. And so that permeates into the audience that is kind and warm, but not the drama that you see in St. Petersburg or Milan in terms of audience reaction. But in St. Petersburg, they also are, there's this Russian love for their artists. In the Soviet Union, but even before, artists were exalted and they were
It's
national heroes.
it's a form of unimaginable respect. It's different from groupies. You don't have groupies in Russia. They have people who really respect the artist as a special human being who is able to produce something extraordinary for a large majority of people. And to come back to the particular audience of Russia and the particular, uh, in a way, culture of Russia, I always say that one of the most incredible episodes is when I was going to the Mariinsky quite regularly, and then in the Mariinsky you still had these huge elevators,
Mhm.
and inside the elevator you had an old lady, a babushka, who was manipulating these elevators up and down because nobody could even understand how to maneuver these machines. And these ladies, they had a kind of small corner there with a chair, with flowers, with something, and always a book. And once I asked to the lady, "What are you reading?" And of course, she was reading Gogol, and another one was reading Dostoevsky. So I was thinking, gosh, if I would be in Italy, they would read Gazzetta dello Sport, the man a Gazzetta dello Sport, or a woman would read a gossip, daily news.
No.
It's a completely different world.
It's funny you created an image for me that I had forgotten about. The elevators in the Mariinsky, which are beautiful, and I remember them now that you speak of it. I remember it well. And when we in the world, including all of our listeners, are traveling again, and you go to opera and ballet at the Mariinsky, the old building, there's a wonderful new building too, but the old building, make note of the elevators and the elevator operators. It's interesting how in Russia, in the Soviet Union, and so on, there often was work created in a way for little old ladies that I remember being on a train once, and there was basically a woman who sat next to the samovar to dispense tea for anyone who wanted. And she too had the little flowers, fake flowers, they were not real, and a book, now that I think about it. So it reflects, we see these small details tell us a lot about a people.
Absolutely.
Um, Now, you, in a particular way, have come to be associated with the life and the music of Sergei Rachmaninoff. How did that happen?
Yeah, this is again one of the result of my link to Russia. It happened in 2003. I was in Lucerne and I was managing a concert of the Mariinsky theater. I think it was a concert version of Pictam. And suddenly backstage comes a tall man and he said, "I am Alexander Rachmaninoff." I said, "Oh." And
The
I started
grandson,
the
the
grandson,
grandson of Sergei.
the son of Tatiana. Yeah, the son of Tatiana, the daughter, second daughter of Sergei. And because I was speaking Russian, he was kind of fascinated and he started talking to me and asking me what I was doing, how an Italian could speak Russian, and so on. And then he gave me his visit card and I started inviting him every time I was producing events with Rachmaninoff. So in 2004, I produced a Rachmaninoff Marathon with one of my artists and his piano studio in Rome, at the Auditorium Parco della Musica. And he came and he stayed for about 3 days. And we knew each other better and better. And then a few months later, he phoned me and he said, "Can I come to your office?" At the time, I had an office in Milan. he came there and I invited him for lunch. I thought it was normal. I mean, the man went all the way through to Milan from Lucerne by train, and then I invited him for lunch. I didn't expect him to pay my lunch. It was my city, so I invited him to lunch. And then at the end of the lunch, he said, you know, I really like your way, because usually when I go out, I have to pay for the others. And I said, why? I mean, and then he said, well, I would like to ask you if you can help me. I have a foundation. And he started talking about his mission. I didn't know that Rachmaninoff had a house in Switzerland, a wonderful estate called Senar, Sergei Natalia Rachmaninoff.
Natalia being his wife.
Natalia being his wife.
Sergei and Natalia are Rachmaninoff.
Exactly. And then said, I want to promote the music of my grandfather, because I think that many works are not respected as they should. And so, of course, Rachmaninoff, everybody knows Piano Concerto number 2, number 3, Paganini Variation, Second Symphony, and then Preludes, and then little more. Mm-hmm. But he composed a huge amount of works, and sometimes works which were absolutely unknown, as the case of the First Symphony. So one of my first job helping Alexander Rachmaninoff was to convince conductors to get the Second Symphony back to the stage and back to
the First Symphony?
The First Symphony.
First Symphony, yeah.
The First Symphony has a very strange story, because very peculiar story, because Rachmaninoff, after the great success of his first piano concerto, of his preludes, and some of the first smaller compositions, he wanted to prove that he was a great symphonic composer, such as Tchaikovsky. And so he composed his First Symphony, and he was really convinced that this was a great work. The work was performed first time by the orchestra of the conservatory in St. Petersburg, and the conductor was Glazunov. So the stories tells us that the composer, the conductor, Glazunov, was drunk, which was happening very
possible
often.
In Russia.
Yes, it was very possible, especially Glazunov, like Mussorgsky. Those people were indulging in alcohol quite a lot. The symphony is very difficult, and the orchestra of conservatory is not necessarily a very professional orchestra, so would have needed a lot of rehearsal and a lot of focus and work. And so the performance was a disaster. The performance got horrible reviews, especially from one of the great critics of the time, also composer QE, who wrote the famous sentence, if there is a devil and there is a inferno, a hell, this piece would be the perfect work to be played in hell by the devils. So, I mean, of course, Rachmaninoff was devastated and basically stopped composing for 2 years. And he never went back to this work. Famously, the original manuscript of the First Symphony disappeared. And the only way in the late 40s we were able to reproduce the Second Symphony is because in the St. Petersburg Conservatory, First Symphony, somebody at the Conservatory of St. Petersburg found the parts, orchestral parts. And so they recognized that they had something of Rachmaninoff, and they started putting together a score. But again, during even the life of Rachmaninoff's wife, the work was forbidden, because Rachmaninoff said, never again. So then, the second generation, the two daughters, they wanted to revive, because they knew that the father was very hurt by what happened with his First Symphony. And finally, I started hearing the piece, and I thought, this is a wonderful work. I heard the work was known basically only in Russia. Mazel did one recording with the Berlin Philharmonic, honestly speaking, not very inspired. Then we started working on this, and we produced a number of concerts with the First Symphony around the world. We encourage more conductors to learn the piece, And Alexander was very happy, so he decided to hire me on a regular basis as his assistant for his, let's say, executive producer for projects related to Rachmaninoff. Then Alexander unfortunately died in 2012 suddenly of ictus, how to
Stroke.
say,
A
stroke,
stroke. Yeah.
stroke. And so he left the foundation and the Villa Senar into a complicated legal situation with his legal heirs who were not really interested to continue the work of the father. But in his testament, he left the house to the foundation because he wanted absolutely the house to remain as a monument for celebrating the memory of Sergei Rachmaninoff and to reverse the narrative of Rachmaninoff as a depressed man, as a man who is always crying about his past. And I discover a fascinating figure, completely different, a man full of life, full of passion, full of energy, full of capacity to rebuild his life from scratch every time. Remarkable man, not only a fantastic musician, but a remarkable man.
He, in fact, I because of having to speak to you about him, I had the pleasure of having to read about Rachmaninoff for the past week, and I learned a great deal. I did not know how many illnesses, how many bankruptcies, the destruction of his villa in Russia, his father basically spending the family money. There was a lot of money, but he spent it. But
Completely, and he ruined the family, and he stayed
yeah,
with no money at all, and he had to go to live in the apartment of the sister of the mother, Butikova, who was the wife of a very important general of the army, and they had a great property, Ivanovka. And this is the place where he started going, invited by the cousins, and this is the reason why finally he ended up marrying his cousin. Natalia is the cousin.
they were first
And
cousins.
first
Yeah.
cousins, that's why they had to get a special permission from the Tsar. And that's why they married in a very small church inside a military barracks, not to be really recognized. Anyhow, and then he was building his reputation, and then the First Symphony. So one break, and then second piano concerto, huge success, back again to glory, to success, to great life. Then comes the Russian Revolution. Again, he lose everything, literally everything.
And I just want to say that two of his beloved sisters died of illness very young.
Yes, exactly. Especially the one who was a singer, a mezzo
Yes.
soprano.
Yes. And then I discovered that, we're talking about pandemics. Everybody refers to the so-called Spanish flu of 1918. We should specify it was not Spanish. It originated in Kansas in the United States, but it's called the Spanish flu. I didn't know that he had the Spanish flu and recovered.
Not only the two daughters, while he was composing the bells in Rome, they got typhus.
Well, that I was about to say that,
So
and they went
he
to
had to
Germany
fly.
because they didn't trust Roman doctors. But since we're in Rome, let's talk about Rome. He had a little flat on the Spanish steps that he took, but he put his family in a pensione, in a rooming house, so that he could work on his own. And someone handed him Edgar Allan Poe's The Bells. And that apparently was very significant for him. What I mention this because you once took me to a performance of The Bells, which I had never heard. And tell us about The Bells.
Well, the Bells is a very special composition which Rachmaninoff considered his best, his more complete, in a way his moral testament. And also because the bells has always played a very important role in Rachmaninoff's lives and in Rachmaninoff's imagination. He always speaks about the memories of him going with the grandmother to the church. And of course, the bells were calling people to the
In
church.
Russia.
And Russian bells are specifically extremely musical. They have melodies. They have fantastic, structured melodies coming out from bells in the Russian monasteries. So even the first great success of Rachmaninoff, the famous prelude in C minor, represents the bells. pa, pi, pa, pa, pi, pa. Those are the bells. Bo, pim, pom, pom. This is what the memory, what was sitting in his musical memory from the childhood. So the bells are uh, going through his life with a great consistency. The other theme, which is for Rachmaninoff extremely significant, is the famous Dies Irae,
Hmm.
which comes back regularly because Rachmaninoff was also a very religious man.
Yeah.
He was a believer, and he was somehow afraid of the last moment, when the last moment would come and the moment of the judgment would come. So this pi pa 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 Gregorian
Yeah.
Dies Irae.
Well, I tried in listening again to the bells before talking to you and reading about him to picture him in Rome. And the reason for that is that, yes, Russian bells are remarkable. And my Russian background, I hear that. But my Italian side, I think of bells in Italy. And my friend, you probably have traveled in much more of Russia than I have, but I'll bet that I've traveled in more of Italy than you have. And
Maybe
there's a
possible.
town called Agnone, Agnone, which is in the province of Isernia, which is in the tiny region of Molise in southern Italy. And a friend of mine in Milan referred to Molise as the Wyoming of Italy. You've heard about it, but no one's ever been there. I've
I've
been.
never been in Isernia in my
I
life.
I love Molise. It's a beautiful,
I've
very
never been
interesting
there.
region with
Never.
great oil, great culture, beautiful poetry, and it has the Marinelli Bell Factory. And the Marinelli Bell Factory was founded in the year 1000, and it is the oldest family business in Italy and one of the three oldest in the world.
Wow.
And to study bells, I went and spent a week in Agnone at the Marinelli Bell Factory years ago to see how they craft this metal to make, in effect, music and the resonance that happens with the bells. And probably their most famous bell is the one in the Leaning Tower of Pisa, but they also make bells for most of the churches of Italy, including the churches of Rome.
Right.
So it's called the Pontificia, I think I pronounced that correctly, Fondaria Marinelli. In other words, the papal
Pontificia
foundry,
Fonderia. Yeah, yeah.
Pontificia
Pontificia
Fondaria.
Fonderia. Yeah, exactly.
And it is, when I am in Rome, you hear it in Tosca, you hear it in everything that's written about Rome. You hear the Roman bells. And here was Rachmaninoff on the Piazza di Spagna with the church at the top of the steps, hearing these bells, because in Italy, I don't know about Russia, but in Italy, they mark every hour. In a little town that I live in, Liguria,
They
every
even
15,
mark every
every
15 minutes.
15 minutes from 7 in the morning to midnight.
Yes,
Every
absolutely.
15 minutes we know the time. So
Yes.
no one has to wear a watch because you know what time it is. And imagine Rachmaninoff. I want you to tell me what you would think of him in Rome, hearing the bells while writing the bells. What would
Well,
that be like?
of course, it was it was one of the best time for Rachmaninoff, and this is maybe the reason why he thinks that the bells is the best composition. The bells is made in three movements. First movement, the tenor is singing. Second movement, a fourth movement, sorry, because there is a first movement with the tenor, second movement with the soprano, third movement with the chorus, and fourth movement with the bass, which represents death. So every movement is a moment of the life of a human being. So you go through childhood to birth, you go through wedding, you go through adult and tumultuous life, and then you get to the dark side of the death. And the bells are accompanying all these phases of the human life. So Rachmaninoff is a believer, and you see he's a believer even from the notes he writes in his manuscripts. in Senar, we recently have got the permission to reproduce the original manuscript of the two works that Rachmaninoff has composed at Senar, the famous Paganini variation, Paganini Rhapsody, and the Third Symphony. And at the very end, after the last bar of the Paganini Rhapsody, he wrote, with his very small writing, he wrote Senar, the date, and then Slava Bogu, thanks God. So it represents something very deep for Rachmaninoff, always.
Another one of the works that you picked for our listeners to listen to is The Isle of the Dead.
The Isle of the Dead is one of my favorite.
By Rachmaninoff.
Yeah, really one of my favorite works by Rachmaninoff. I discovered with my great surprise that it's so rarely performed. If you imagine, once we did the project with the Orchestre de la Suisse Romande and several conductors to make a Rachmaninoff cycle with all the piano concerti and other pieces together. So 5 concerts with the 4 piano concerti plus the Paganini Rhapsody, accompanied by symphonies, tone poems, and other symphonic works. And I discovered that 2013 was the first time ever the Swiss Romande Orchestra was performing The Isle of the Dead. And I thought it was very strange. The work is amazing, is a work of absolute genius, and I would really recommend the listeners, if they want to have a little but very strong sense of the piece, is to listen through the first 8 minutes, or even from the minute 6 to 8, where the climax of the piece comes. And when you have a gloomy condensation of, like if you have the condensation of the clouds in the sky, and then suddenly the climax comes, and you are like looking at the sea, and by the way, this work was written by Rachmaninoff, being inspired by a painting, not even a painting, by a photo, a black and white photo of a painting of Arnold Böcklin, The Isle of the Dead. Yeah. And you see this boat with a figure with a white dress, long dress, which is probably the Death himself, going to this island, and you see the movement of the water, and suddenly you see that clouds are aggregating and getting very dark and very tumultuous, and then you have this amazing climax. And I think that this recording with the Chicago Symphony and Fritz Reiner is so amazing for this specific moment. Is terrible. It's terrifying. It's a terrifying moment. It's like if Rachmaninoff is sensing that something very bad is going to happen. This was composed between 1908 and 1909, while he was he left Russia because of the Decabristov revolution, first kind of revolution, and Rachmaninoff was very afraid of unrest, and he wanted to be in a peaceful place, so he bought a beautiful house in Dresden. At the time, he had good money. He went to Dresden, and he composed there a few very important works. By the way, the Third Piano Concerto and the Second Symphony, and the First Piano Sonata, which is another work which, through the Rachmaninoff Foundation, we have helped to revive.
He did a tour in the United States in around 1908, 1909, and he didn't love it. He had mixed feelings about it, but it was a good place to make money. And what listeners elsewhere don't know about America, but especially New York, in the first decade of the 20th century, was that we in New York at that time had Arturo Toscanini, Richard Strauss, Gustav Mahler, all here at the same time. And in 1909, Rachmaninoff, with the New York Philharmonic, played his second piano concerto.
His third piano concerto.
Third, I'm sorry, while Mahler conducted. Imagine Mahler and Rachmaninoff together at Carnegie Hall on a stage in New York
That's
City.
An historical event, and Rachmaninoff is writing in his letters that He was so overwhelmed by the quality of the orchestra, by the precision of the orchestra. And famously, Mahler was rehearsing for 2 weeks to prepare the orchestra for this event. And this is the reason why, by the way, through this event, Rachmaninoff became very famous in the United States. And when he had to leave Russia suddenly in December 1917, in December, he was invited by the King of Sweden to play 2 concerts in Stockholm. And all the friends said, take the family and leave because things here are going to be extremely bad for you. Rachmaninoff was issued from a noble family. And then, in fact, 22 members of his family were killed by the Bolsheviks. And his property in Ivanovka was burned and destroyed by the Bolsheviks soon after his he flew Russia. So he was in Stockholm after these 2 concerts. He went there with literally 1 suitcase, wife, 2 daughters, no money, what to do. And then, of course, the Americans heard about Rachmaninoff being somehow free, and they immediately invited him to America. Charles Foley was a very famous impresario at the time, and he said, come, I will make you a very rich and famous man. And this, in fact, happened. Rachmaninoff arrived in America in May 1918, and in the following 11 years, 12 years, he made so much money that he was able to buy and to build a property like Sennar. For you to have an idea, when Rachmaninoff was coming to Sennar, the local people were not calling him the composer, but the American millionaire, you know?
Well, that's because in the 1920s in the United States, there was a lot of money around. I always look to history for my lessons because, sometimes everything works. Sometimes there's a pandemic. Sometimes economically things are good. Sometimes they're not good. Italians learned this a long time ago, and they always know how to plan for the future because they have such a long history that they learn from. One thing I discovered that I didn't know about him, I knew that he lived in my neighborhood, but I didn't know where. He lived at 33 Riverside Drive, which is a very nice building. Now it's an impossibly expensive building to try to get into.
Yeah.
But I recognized the address, 33 Riverside Drive, and I asked myself why. And then I remembered that a few years ago, a cousin of mine had a surprise birthday party on the roof of 33 Riverside Drive in the apartment that belonged to George Gershwin, who lived there and composed a lot of his music there. I don't know when he bought it, and I couldn't find out, or acquired it. I don't know when that was, but I had this image of George Gershwin and Rachmaninoff being in the same building, and perhaps they knew one another because Gershwin died in 1937. Rachmaninoff, I believe, in 43, but he left the apartment in like 40 or 41 when he moved to California.
Yeah, exactly.
Very possible, very likely.
By the way, Rachmaninoff loved jazz. Yeah. He was often going to jazz clubs. Mm-hmm. And this is also, you can also hear this in his music. I mean, especially in the solo of the saxophone in his symphonic dances. So he was really a man of his time. He was a man in love with technology. Very few people know that he was one of the first investors in the Sikorsky Industries, the helicopter.
Helicopters, yeah.
Helicopter, yeah. Igor Sikorsky was a Russian immigrant. He was one of the very few engineer of aviation in Russia. He was from Ukraine, but at the time, Ukraine was part of the big Russia. So he flew to America as an immigrant, and he went to one of the concerts of Sergei Rachmaninoff, and he said, listen, I want to tell you my story, and he told him his story, and Rachmaninoff was a freak for speed, cars. In Sennar, he bought a fantastic boat he changed the engine because he wanted to be really speed, able to go very fast to Lucerne. So in few words, he said, I have a revolutionary idea. I want to create a vertaliot, helicopter. And this is the technique. And Rachmaninoff said, that's a genius idea. And he gave him $5,000. And thanks to this $5,000, Sikorsky started his business, and Rachmaninoff was appointed vice president, honorary vice president of Sikorsky Industries.
Didn't know that. I know that he got to know other people from the old world, such as Leopold Stokowski, but especially Vladimir Horowitz, who was younger by about 25 years than was Rachmaninoff. But apparently they had great respect for one another, and they shared an interest in the music of Scriabin, who they admired when not everyone did. But
When
Rachmaninoff
very,
in
very few
Russia
knew about
toured.
him.
I know that Rachmaninoff toured Russia playing the music of Scriabin after Scriabin died very young to raise money for the widow. And
Absolutely.
I met and worked a little bit with Horowitz late in his career. And at that time, he was playing a lot of Scriabin. And I asked him why. And he said, try to do the imitation. My boy, I do them because they are very short.
But it's true that Rachmaninoff played a lot of Scriabin in order to support Scriabin's family after
Yes.
the death of Alexander Scriabin. And this is another character of the personality of Sergei Rachmaninoff, who was an extremely generous man. And we discovered this when we finally opened the archives of Senar, and we found hundreds of letters of people writing to Sergei Rachmaninoff at Senar and asking him for financial support. And where you recognize that he was generous, because the letters are saying, Sergei Vasilievich, can you help us as you did last year? So, which means that he was really helping people. He made many, many benefit concerts. There was one famous gala concert which he did to raise money to buy medicine and food to be sent to Russia from United States in 1942 or 41 in the period of the siege of Leningrad.
Yeah.
And this was also one of the reasons why somehow Stalin was at the end of his life was forgiving him. And there was this famous episode of Sergei Rachmaninoff basically in his last hours, just before his 70th birthday, receiving the telegram from the Union of the Soviet Composers saying, for the first time after basically 25 years, Sergei Vasilievich, we would like to honor your 70th birthday. You are the soul of Russia, and so on. So the man was really generous, really generous.
And I asked myself, the other famous Russian emigre composer, of course, was Igor Stravinsky. And in my reading, I didn't find too much that connected them until the very end of Rachmaninoff's life, when both were living in Los Angeles, in Beverly Hills. And they apparently had meals together during World War II when Rachmaninoff was quite sick, because he left New York to go for the better weather in California.
Mm-hmm.
And he, I guess they had things to talk about in Russian with one another. Do you have any idea what Stravinsky and Rachmaninoff might have spoken about?
Well, according to what I heard, Rachmaninoff was a little bit embarrassed because Stravinsky was constantly talking about money. and Rachmaninoff, who was a very shy and very discreet man, really an old gentleman. I mean, when you go to Senar, we still have one of his clothes, and the clothes were done in Savile Row in London, tailor-made. He was a real gentleman, and he would never have been speaking about money at dinner. And Stravinsky was constantly asking him how much you earn for your composition, how much you earn for author rights. But finally, because Sergei really needed to be close to Russians, and this is also witnessed by the fact that the people around him were always Russian or Georgian. At Senar, he brought a Georgian cook and a Russian nanny, and Russia and a driver from Russia even. So Russia was always with him. And
I was
Stravinsky
about
was
to say that if you're getting food from Russia, you want it from Georgia. That's probably the best food
exactly.
in the former Soviet Empire.
Exactly. And once I was near the kitchen at Senar, there is a room which was occupied by the cook, and I found there a very funny placard with the Georgian alphabet. And I
Yes.
said, "Why we have a Georgian alphabet here?" And then Alexander said, "Why? Because the cook was George." So everything has a reason.
But Rachmaninoff, I'm not going to get into the controversy about where he should have been buried because that was a big issue. People can look it up. But he is buried in a very famous cemetery north of New York City called Valhalla.
Valhalla, Kensico, yes.
Yeah, in Kensico, but the town is
Kensico.
Valhalla. And
Valhalla, yes.
every musician I know around here wants to be buried in Valhalla. But so
Yeah,
therefore,
celebrities are there, no?
yeah,
Football players,
football player Lou Gehrig, one of the most important baseball players of
baseball
all time.
players. Yes, I was there a
Jazz
couple of times.
musicians are there. No, it's a very important cemetery. But I would like to know as we conclude the activities now of the foundation in terms of keeping Rachmaninoff's music alive, not him alive, but his music, his artistry. How do you run it? You're not a Rachmaninoff, you are Ettore Volontieri, and you're the best Ettore Volontieri possible, but you sometimes an outsider comes to something and brings fresh perspective and passion that a family member, an insider, could not.
Well,
Bayreuth in Germany is an example. It's always been Wagner family members,
yeah.
but you are not a
No,
Rachmaninoff.
I am. I have to say, I serve since 2012 the foundation as the general manager of the foundation. We have a wonderful board now with a great president who is, by the way, is a great diplomat, a former ambassador of Switzerland in the United States, Urs Ziswiller. And the main goal of the foundation today is to preserve the Villa Senar as a cultural heritage, to preserve this wonderful place, which is the only original place where Rachmaninoff has been lived and left a lot of his own great memories. A villa which he designed with a park which is designed to
The rose
preserve
garden that
roses.
evokes his old
I mean,
Russian memory. Yeah.
as soon as the pandemic is finished, next time you come to Europe, you have to visit Senar. It's a wonderful place. It's a place of inspiration. It's a place where Rachmaninoff was able to compose again after so long silence two of his masterpieces. I mean, the Paganini variations. And if you listen to variation number 18, you understand that this man there has found again peace and freedom and joy. The beauty of this melody. The beauty of the melodies of the second movement of the third symphony. So our goal is now to preserve this place as a cultural heritage. We succeed already in one very important thing, that the house, and not only the house, but also the park and the archives are protected by the canton of Lucerne, are in the list of the protected monument. So now nobody can really disperse this patrimoine, this heritage, cultural heritage. But of course, we would like to do more and to create there a cultural center, a place where people can meet and understand better about the personality of this great man who was really at the center of one of the most extraordinary period for the history of the recent times. I mean, the 30s. He was at Senar between 1930 and 1939, so very crucial time. He was regularly meeting Toscanini during the Lucerne Festival. He even performed only one and only time he accepted to perform in Lucerne. He accepted to perform at the festival because it was the summer of 1939 and everybody was so afraid about the aggressiveness of the Nazi. And the festival in Lucerne was the place where all the musicians which were banned by Austria and German Nazi were able to express themselves, starting with this great man, Bruno Walter.
Yeah.
And Toscanini was one of the soul of the festival, and he performed for the first time Wagner music in the Wagner house. You know, Wagner was living in Tripschen, just in the suburb of Lucerne, in a beautiful house, and Toscanini decided to conduct the first concert of the festival in the park, open air, which he hated. Open air. He conducted a Wagner program to say to the Germans, Wagner is not a Nazi. Wagner is immortal music which everybody has to play and to enjoy.
I always
Rachmaninoff,
remind people, Wagner, controversial figure, but he died in 1883. So we
yeah,
need to put him in the context of his life then. Whatever has been put on him after, he didn't do that.
yeah,
We
he was
can
anti-Semitic. We know that he was anti-Semitic.
definitely.
Yes, but I mean, of course, the Nazis were eating his music and his figure to make an ambassador of their horrible things. But anyhow, I wanted to say that Rachmaninoff agreed to perform a concert which he never did before, because he wanted to give a sign of support with his presence, and it was a fabulous concert. The Maharaja of India came to attend the concert of Rachmaninoff conducted by Ansermet. And he performed in this occasion the piano concerto number 1 of Beethoven and his own Paganini Rhapsody. And then 3 days later, this was the 18th of August, 1939, 3 days later he left to go back to America. And then on the 1st of September, the Second World War started, and he was then unable to get back to Senart. So was, for the third time, a big loss of the place he was really attached to as a place where he could compose.
Yeah. I'm going to switch gears for our final conversation here. Although I love seeing you and I miss you because we are very close friends and it's been too long. This pandemic has kept us apart. Again, this is not about naming names, but one consequence of the pandemic has been an almost complete stop to the classical music business and opera, because people who do this work perform in public, and means the public has to gather, but also singers and choruses sing out. They would be spreading, if they had a germ, they would be spreading it. Orchestral instrumentalists. I know, sadly, of 2 members of the Metropolitan Opera Orchestra who died, and 1 conductor here.
By the way, yes.
And so it does happen. It's very real. But it's affected also management companies. And this is my opinion, you can disagree. They were struggling anyway, even before. And I see the way forward for our field and for people who love and support the arts, as I hope they will, more in the model that you have done for many years. In other words, not a massive agency, but smaller and very focused. And the big difference being, and our listeners have discovered this about you in a huge way today, is you have culture, you have ideas, you not only love these art forms, but you help create programming, and you guide musicians toward thinking about things. And yes, it's ultimately the person who runs the opera company, the symphony, who would make those decisions. But I see the manager as the third piece of the stool, with the management, the artist, and the manager. I mean, the people who run the institution, the manager and the artist. And this is how we're going to go forward now. I think that you don't have to tell us, have ideas for musical performances and ways of bringing music to the public that we've not seen yet because of what the pandemic has imposed. How do you see the management side progressing in the future when we finally have the worst of this pandemic behind us? It will always be with us, but when the worst is behind us.
Well, of course, as you said, this pandemic has affected enormously our work. Myself, I basically stopped traveling, which was for me a regular. I mean, I would take a plane at least twice per week, and now I am basically traveling very little between Switzerland, inside Switzerland, little bit in Italy, and nothing else. So the business has been affected in a dramatic way. Of course, the big business is affected in a major way, and we saw, unfortunately, already the consequences on few big historical offices, especially in America and UK. We are fortunate. I mean, I consider myself fortunate to work in Switzerland because Switzerland has a system to support business in a time of crisis, which was same as in Germany and in Austria. This particular scheme was created during the big crisis of the 70s. You remember the austerity with the oil, the crude crisis, hugely affected generally the business in the world. So back to the 70s, the German-speaking countries created this system called Kurzarbeit, which means short hour work, short work hour. So at the moment, our work is of course reduced because there is much less activity. So we can apply for a reduction of the time of work, and the government is compensating what we are missing up to the 80% of our salaries. So, which means that we can survive. We have still the possibility to work but to work less. While technically, for instance, our colleagues in England, they have problems with the so-called furlough, which oblige you just to live. You have to live, and you cannot even make a phone call. You cannot make an email. So how you can keep the business going, even in the small scale, if you are not allowed to communicate with your clients and with your partners? So to come back to your question, I believe that this pandemic is already, by the way, indicating the way out, which is to create small boutiques, agencies which are more focused on artist management than on big projects and touring, because, by the way, we don't know when the touring activities will really resume for many reasons. We don't know how much the travel industry will be affected, how much will cost to travel in the future from one continent to another. I mean, American orchestras flying from America to China, to Japan, to Europe, how much it will cost. Hotels, how the tourist environment will be affected, and how much more expensive will become all this package, which is fundamental for the organization of the touring activity. So I think artist management will survive, will have to become smaller and more focused. I think quality will be always, but even more today, a determinant aspect. And I keep saying, it was my credo all my life. It's creativity, is to do something different, is to matter. Why you need a manager today? To book a hotel, to book a travel, to negotiate the fee? Of course, you may need an agent to make dirty work, because famously managers has always been doing the so-called dirty work. What I refuse to do, I mean, I don't want to do the dirty work. I want to do my work as a part of the cultural environment, in one specific segment of the cultural environment, where I serve my artist for the best benefit of their career and ultimately the best result of the cultural environment, because artists who do good, they do good for culture. Mm-hmm. So that's my vision. That's what gives me the energy and the motivation to continue, even in this very difficult environment.
And I'm convinced that creativity is happening, but we just are not seeing it yet. But I'm certain that composers and musicians and writers and painters and so on are still working, because even if they're not being paid for it, if you have a creative instinct and urge, you have to do it. I write every day. I know there's some people who are very blocked and feel frustrated, and certainly music is
You
collaborative.
know,
Even
the, there are many theories that arts is flourishing in the worst time. If you
yeah,
think when the poor Michelangelo, because you talk about Michelangelo, was working, it was probably one of the most terrible time. He
yeah,
was in Rome with the Peace. He was in Rome with the Lanzichenecchi coming and destroying Rome. He was running between Florence and Rome, trying to avoid to be killed by bandits around. I mean, and he did what he did. Look at
and
Shostakovich. Look at
Michelangelo's lifetime overlapped with 13 different popes. And every time there was a change of a pope, the pope would say, "Stop doing that building that you did for my predecessor and do the project for me." And then this other pope would die, and the next one would say, "Stop doing the project for that pope." And Michelangelo was furious. So he just kept doing what he was doing. There was one project he worked on for 45 years until he felt he was satisfied with it, even though the pope who commissioned it died in 1512. Michelangelo worked on it for another 40 plus years. And I take inspiration from him because his motto was very simply in Italian, ancora imparo. I'm still learning. So with that, my dear friend Ettore, I can say
yes,
from you, ancora imparo. You teach me when I see you, and you inspire me.
and
And
vice versa.
I know that our listeners discovered someone special today who I've known for many years. So I do thank you. Grazie.
Thank you
Spasiba.
for having me in this wonderful
Merci.
program.
Dankeschön. And I do hope that we can actually see each other in life. And I encourage our listeners to go listen to the selections by Rachmaninoff, by Casella, by Ferrari, by Verdi that Ettore Volontieri gave us today. So thank you.
Thank you so much.